It began with a dream of purity, of order, of a country cleansed from the poison of alcohol. A dream that promised to save families, protect morals, and uplift the nation's soul. But by the time it ended, America was on its knees, drunk on violence, corruption, and hypocrisy. This is the story of how the Prohibition era, meant to make the United States moral again, instead made it one of the most lawless nations in history. Calm, serious tone. Before we start, if you're fascinated by the dark corners of American history, by the truths they don't put in textbooks, make sure to subscribe and stay with us till the end. Because what you're about to hear, high ascent to just about alcohol, S about what happens when a country tries to control human nature itself. Now, let's go back to the year 1920. At midnight on January 17th, the 18th Amendment took effect. In one stroke, the U.S. government outlawed the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. The temperance movement had won. The streets would run clean again, and the American home would be safe. Or so they thought. Almost instantly, the country changed. Bars shuttered. Breweries went bankrupt. But behind those closed doors, something else began to grow. A black market unlike anything the country had ever seen. In the dark of night, secret shipments arrived at hidden docks. Men in trench coats moved barrels labeled industrial alcohol that were anything but. Doctors wrote fake prescriptions for medicinal whiskey, and average citizens, people who once obeyed the law, learned how to break it with a smile. Because the thing about desire is, you can't legislate it out of existence. You can only drive it underground. By 1921, America had become a nation of liars. Politicians drank in private while preaching sobriety in public. Police took bribes to look the other way. Ministers, once the backbone of temperance, found their congregations shrinking as the speakeasies filled up. It wasn't the sober utopia reformers imagined. It was the birth of organized crime. Bootleggers became businessmen. Smugglers became celebrities. And in cities like Chicago, one name began to echo louder than any other: Al Capone. Capone didn't invent organized crime, but he perfected it. He understood something the government never did, that alcohol wasn't the problem. It was the profit. He built an empire supplying what Americans secretly wanted. In every barbershop, in every basement club, in every back alley, someone had a bottle. And behind that bottle was blood. Rival gangs turned city streets into battlegrounds. Drive-by shootings became a normal part of urban life. Police found bodies in car trunks, alleys, even iceboxes. And yet, people kept drinking. In the 1920s, there were more illegal drinking establishments in New York than there had ever been legal ones before the ban. Speakeasies became symbols of rebellion, places where men and women could laugh in the face of the law. Jazz played, dresses shortened, morals loosened. The roaring Twenties roared not in spite of prohibition, but because of it. While reformers blamed alcohol for moral decay, their great experiment had created a culture that celebrated sin. It was the birth of modern nightlife, the first time America truly learned to live in the shadows. But the cost was enormous. Violence skyrocketed. Federal prisons overflowed. The government spent millions chasing ghosts, raiding warehouses, seizing stills, and arresting small-time brewers while crime bosses grew richer than ever. In Washington, lawmakers debated how a nation built on freedom could justify jailing its own citizens for a drink. But every time they tried to fix the law, the corruption ran deeper. Because everyone, from the cop on the corner to the senator in the Capitol, had their own price. The American dream of morality had turned into a nightmare of greed. Even the alcohol itself became deadly. With legal liquor banned, people turned to industrial products, cleaning alcohol, paint thinner, even gasoline, trying to distill them into something drinkable. Thousands died from poisoned bathtub gin. And when the government realized what was happening, they did the unthinkable. They ordered manufacturers to make industrial alcohol even more toxic to discourage bootlegging. The result? More than 10,000 Americans were poisoned to death by their own government, all in the name of purity. As the decade wore on, the illusion of control began to crumble. Women who had fought for the ban now joined the resistance. In the same parlors where they once preached sobriety, they mixed cocktails. Journalists exposed the hypocrisy, the secret parties in Washington, the hidden bars under police headquarters. And through it all, the country's faith in its own institutions began to rot. Prohibition didn't just kill the liquor trade. It killed trust. It taught Americans that the law could be broken, that morality could be bought, and that even the purest ideals could be twisted when mixed with politics. The line between criminal and citizen blurred. A bootlegger could be a hero. A government agent could be a thief. The word lawless lost its meaning, because when the law itself becomes the enemy, who's left to obey? By 1927, the noble experiment had become a national joke. Juries refused to convict drinkers. Cities like New York and San Francisco stopped enforcing the ban altogether. The government's grand plan to shape moral behavior had turned into an open rebellion. And yet, for many Americans, life during Prohibition wasn't glamorous. It was grim. Rural families who once brewed beer for extra income were ruined. Farmers who grew barley and hops saw their crops rot in the fields. Thousands lost jobs as breweries and distilleries collapsed, a wound that deepened as the Great Depression began. Even the church, the moral heart of the movement, began to fracture. Preachers who once thundered about the dangers of drink now whispered doubts from the pulpit. If virtue must be forced, one pastor said, is it still virtue? But perhaps the most shocking transformation of all was social. Prohibition didn't make Americans sober. It made them secretive. It turned ordinary people into criminals and crime into a business. It gave rise to the first celebrity gangsters, the first female bartenders, the first underground parties that blurred class and race in ways the law above ground never would have allowed. In the smoke-filled corners of a speakeasy, the son of a banker might drink beside a jazz musician. A woman, once confined to her husband's parlor, might raise a glass with a stranger. The law had failed, but in its failure, something strange and liberating was born. A sense that America, for all its moral talk, was ready to break its own chains. And the people loved it. Prohibition had promised to save the soul of the nation. Instead, it revealed its true face, defiant, hypocritical, and wild. As one journalist wrote in 1928, the road to hell is paved with good intentions and littered with empty gin bottles. But even as the 1920s burned bright, storm clouds gathered. The Great Depression was coming, and with it, the American experiment in enforced virtue was about to face its final reckoning. Because what happens when a nation already torn by hypocrisy begins to starve? When crime becomes the only business left that pays? In the next part, we'll step deeper into that collapse, into the days when the same government that had sworn to keep America sober quietly began to consider a new truth, that maybe, just maybe, salvation could come from the bottom of a bottle. By the dawn of the 1930s, the American dream had cracked like a dry riverbed. Factories went silent. Men wandered the streets with empty hands and hollow eyes. The Great Depression had swallowed the country whole, and the noble experiment, Prohibition, was now just another cruel joke told over a glass of something illegal. The law said no, but hunger said yes. Bootleggers who had once been outlaws were now community lifelines. They provided more than liquor. They gave escape. In the dark corners of America's despair, people sought comfort in the forbidden warmth of a bottle. And the government? It was bleeding money. With breweries, distilleries, and taverns gone, federal and state governments had lost billions in alcohol taxes. Before 1920, those taxes had been one of the biggest sources of national revenue. Now, that money had vanished, replaced by corruption, chaos, and crime. Every time a federal agent raided a speakeasy, another opened across the street. Every time the government destroyed a still, 10 more bubbled to life in the woods. Enforcement was impossible. The Treasury Department admitted that for every gallon of liquor they seized, another 100 reached the market. The nation was, in every sense, drunk, not on alcohol, but on defiance. And the price of that defiance was blood. Chicago, once a city of industry, had become a battlefield. The Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929 shocked the world. 7 men gunned down in cold blood, their bodies crumpled against a brick wall, executed by men dressed as police officers. The killings were ordered by Al Capone's gang in their war for control of Chicago's liquor trade. That massacre symbolized everything Prohibition had unleashed: greed, brutality, and a government powerless to stop it. In Washington, lawmakers debated how to fix the chaos. But each solution made things worse. The Bureau of Prohibition, underfunded and undermanned, became a symbol of futility. Agents taking bribes, judges turning a blind eye, juries laughing defendants out of court. It wasn't law enforcement anymore. It was theater. And the American people were the audience, watching, disillusioned, as the so-called dry crusade drowned in its own hypocrisy. For ordinary citizens, survival came first. People were losing homes, jobs, and faith. What mattered more? Obeying a broken law, or feeding your children? So, moonshine became the new currency. In rural Appalachia, families built homemade stills, risking prison to trade liquor for flour or medicine. In cities, bootleggers operated with assembly line precision, trucks rolling out at midnight, bribes paid in cash and silence. Even small-town sheriffs, once symbols of law and order, were now known to take a sip before sunrise. The moral fabric reformers had tried to save was now in tatters. And amid the ruin, a strange irony emerged. The same women as groups that had fought for Prohibition now began to fight for its repeal. The Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform, led by Paula Sabin, argued that the ban had destroyed respect for the law, encouraged corruption, and endangered families. They weren't alone. Politicians, once too scared to challenge the dry vote, began to whisper what everyone already knew: Prohibition had failed. But even as the public mood shifted, powerful voices held firm. The Anti-Saloon League, once the most feared lobbying group in America, fought desperately to keep the ban alive. They warned of chaos, moral collapse, and divine punishment if the nation ever went wet again. They couldn't see that the collapse had already arrived, because Prohibition hadn't purified America. It had poisoned it. The economy was dying, the prisons overflowing, and the people no longer trusted the law. When faith in justice disappears, something dangerous fills the void. And that something was organized crime. Bootlegging wasn't just an underground operation anymore. It was an industry. The mafia used it to expand across the nation, laundering profits through banks, factories, and politicians. Corruption reached every level of society. In New York, police officers drank with gangsters. In Detroit, rum runners turned the Great Lakes into smuggling highways. In Texas, moonshiners built small empires hidden in the hills. The country that had once prided itself on moral purity was now running on lies, fear, and blood money. And in the middle of it all stood the American people, tired, hungry, and hopeless. By 1931, newspapers ran editorials openly calling for repeal. "Let us drink to recovery," one headline said, "for it may be our only cure." Even John D. Rockefeller Jr., one of the most prominent early supporters of Prohibition, admitted defeat. In a public letter, he wrote, "When Prohibition was introduced, I hoped it would be widely supported by public opinion, and the day would soon come when the evil effects of alcohol would be recognized. I have slowly and reluctantly come to believe that this has not been the case. When men like Rockefeller gave up, the movement's foundation cracked. Then, in 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran for president, and his campaign made a bold promise to end prohibition once and for all. His slogan said it plainly: a new deal for America. But for millions of Americans, that deal meant one thing above all: a drink. As Roosevelt took the stage on election night, his victory speech was followed by the sound of corks popping in every city in America. Bars reopened in secret celebration. Moonshiners cheered in the mountains. And for the first time in over a decade, the nation allowed itself to hope that the nightmare might finally end. But even as repeal loomed, the damage had already been done. An entire generation had grown up learning that the law could be bent, that the police could be bought, that morality was a weapon wielded by the powerful. Prohibition had reshaped America's soul. It taught people that rebellion could be profitable, that the government's moral crusades could be mocked and ignored. It blurred the line between virtue and vice so completely that even after the law changed, the wounds remained. By the time Roosevelt signed the Cullen-Harrison Act in 1933, legalizing beer and wine under 3.2% alcohol, the country erupted in joy. Crowds poured into the streets, waving mugs and bottles. Bands played. Breweries reopened. Workers who had been unemployed for years suddenly had jobs again. It felt like freedom. But as always, freedom has a price. Because even as the champagne flowed, America's new identity, forged in defiance, bribery, and underground crime, was already taking root. When the 21st Amendment officially repealed prohibition on December 5, 1933, the nation toasted to victory. Happy days are here again, the newspapers sang. But the ghosts of the dry era didn't vanish. They lingered in the smoky bars, in the streets of Chicago, in the quiet moral compromises people had learned to make just to survive. Prohibition was over, but the America it created was here to stay. And in that new America, alcohol wasn't just a drink anymore. It was a symbol of rebellion, of corruption, of freedom bought with blood. It was proof that no matter how righteous a cause may sound, the attempt to control human desire will always end the same way, with the law chasing shadows and the people making their own rules. But the story doesn't end with repeal, because while the bottles were unsealed and the music returned, something darker remained. The criminal networks born during Prohibition didn't vanish. They adapted. They took their profits, their connections, their taste for power, and turned them toward new markets. The ban had ended, but the age of American organized crime had just begun. In the final part, we'll uncover how the scars of Prohibition shaped everything that came after, from the mafia's rise to the birth of federal law enforcement to the lasting distrust between the American people and their government. When the corks popped on December 5, 1933, and the 21st Amendment officially repealed Prohibition, America erupted in celebration. Bands played in the streets. Glasses clinked in speakeasies that no longer needed to hide. For the first time in 13 long years, it was legal to drink again. But beneath the laughter and relief, something darker remained. Because the end of Prohibition didn't erase what those years had done. It merely exposed how deeply they had changed the nation as a soul. The mob didn't dissolve when the liquor taps turned back on. They evolved. The men who once smuggled barrels of whiskey now smuggled heroin. The same gangs that ran speakeasies began running casinos, brothels, and later, racketeering empires. Al Capone may have gone to prison for tax evasion, but his model of organized crime lived on. His associates, men like Lucky Luciano Meyer-Lansky and Frank Costello, turned bootlegging profits into a foundation for modern American crime. They had learned how to corrupt politicians, police chiefs, and judges. They had built supply chains, bribery networks, and systems of silence. And those systems didn't vanish with repeal. they grew stronger. Because for over a decade, the United States had unintentionally taught its own people how to break the law and get away with it. During Prohibition, deception became a national pastime. People lied to police. Doctors wrote fake prescriptions for medicinal whiskey. Priests issued fraudulent permits for sacramental wine. It was a joke everyone was in on. And when the law itself becomes a joke, the concept of justice erodes. Before 1920, the idea of openly defined federal law would have been unthinkable to most citizens. By 1933, it was practically a sport. Even judges were known to wink at defendants in liquor cases, knowing that everyone, including themselves, had likely taken a sip at home. This quiet rebellion left a deep scar on American culture. It created a skepticism toward authority that never fully disappeared. When later generations would face government bans, whether it was drugs, gambling, or even music, they remembered Prohibition. They remembered that the moral crusade of the righteous could turn into tyranny overnight. And they remembered that sometimes breaking the law didn't make you evil. It just made you human. But while the people learned to lie, the government learned something too: how to watch. To enforce Prohibition, the U.S. government had expanded its surveillance capabilities like never before. Agents wiretapped phones, raided private homes, and spied on citizens without warrants. The Bureau of Prohibition, the forerunner to the modern FBI, developed techniques that would later define 20th century policing: undercover operations, sting tactics, and the use of informants. For the first time, the government realized it could justify almost any level of intrusion, as long as it was for the greater good. That lesson didn't vanish with repeal. It became a cornerstone of modern law enforcement. From the FBI's surveillance of civil rights leaders in the 1960s to the war on drugs raids of the 1980s, the shadow of Prohibition loomed over them all. It was the original moral war, and it proved that morality could be weaponized. Even as alcohol flowed freely again, the divide Prohibition created between the righteous and the rebels didn't fade. It simply changed shape. For over a decade, the country had been told that abstinence was patriotic, that drinking was sinful, and that personal freedom could be legislated. When that illusion collapsed, it left behind confusion and guilt. The older generation, who had supported the ban in the name of virtue, felt betrayed. The younger generation, who had grown up breaking the law just to dance and drink, felt liberated but cynical. The moral authority of the church, the temperance unions, and even the government had been shattered. What replaced it was something distinctly American: a new culture of self-determination. People no longer waited for moral approval. They made their own choices, for better or worse. And out of that defiance grew a new era, one defined by jazz, motion pictures, and the roaring nightlife of the 1930s. The Great Gatsby dream, indulgence, rebellion, and wealth was born directly out of the ashes of the noble experiment. Prohibition hadn't made America pure. It had made it wild. For all its moral disaster, the repeal of Prohibition came with an undeniable benefit: money. Within a year of repeal, over 500,000 jobs were created in breweries, bars, and distilleries. Alcohol taxes flooded back into government coffers, providing desperately needed funds for Roosevelt's New Deal programs. Even small towns revived overnight. Old breweries reopened, hiring back fathers who'd lost work in the Depression. Families who'd been scraping by on moonshine profits now earned honest paychecks again. And with those paychecks came pride, the feeling that the country might just recover after all. The drink that had divided America for over a decade was now fueling its economic comeback. But while the economy healed, American culture never went back to what it was before. The speakeasies may have vanished, but their spirit lingered. They had blurred the boundaries between race, gender, and class, at least for a few secret hours a night. In the 1920s, jazz clubs defied segregation. women danced without chaperones, and sexuality became a subject of art, not shame. The rebellion against prohibition had sparked more than just a thirst for liquor. It had created a thirst for freedom, and that thirst spilled over into every corner of American life. The Harlem Renaissance, the rise of the flapper, the cultural explosion of cinema, each carried the DNA of that same defiance. Prohibition, ironically, gave birth to the modern American identity, bold, skeptical, individualistic, and unafraid of challenging authority. Looking back, the story of Prohibition reads less like a moral victory and more like a national cautionary tale. It showed how easily good intentions can lead to chaos, how laws meant to protect people can end up destroying trust in law itself, and how a government that tries to control human desire will always lose because desire doesn't obey legislation. The reformers who fought for prohibition believed they were saving America's soul. Instead, they exposed it. They revealed a country that didn't fit neatly into categories of good and evil, sober and drunk, moral and sinful. They revealed what America truly was: flawed, passionate, rebellious, and endlessly complex. When the last prohibition agents clocked out in 1933, they probably thought their work was over. But in truth, they had only started a conversation that still echoes today, in every debate over drugs, censorship, morality, and freedom. So if you raise a glass today, remember this: you're not just celebrating the right to drink. You're celebrating a lesson written in sweat, blood, and bootleg whiskey. That freedom, once taken, never returns quietly. Prohibition was supposed to make America righteous. Instead, it made America real. This has been the forgotten truth of prohibition, the law that changed everything by breaking everything first.